Hi, my name is Brian. I'm a bit of a historian. As you can see, old book from the 1800s. We're going to break into this. Here's some other old books right here. I've got lots of old books just chilling around. But one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of is that history is a lie. So I'm going to show you in this one book from the 1800s that it's very obvious that it's a lie, okay? It's called history for that particular reason. It's his story, not his story, his story. Like the guy over there, that's his story, okay? History is manipulatable. It's just some guy's story. And do you honestly think the victors been the good guys that won every single battle and then they wrote his story down and that's the truth, guys, and that's a fact? See, this is a big common misconception we have in the world today, that you assume that history is fact. And that is a very, very blatant inconsistency. And I'm also going to tell you that etymology is actually a better form of history than history itself. Now, let's just break it down. I'm going to start with this book from the 1800s, The American Magazine of Useful and Entertaining Knowledge. Here we have the philosophy of history. History has been said to be a philosophy, teaching by example. It must be read with attention, accompanied by mature reflection. And this must depend not more on the accuracy and the ability of the historian than on the wisdom and care of the reader. If you just didn't know, history used to be considered a philosophy, meaning there was a lot of debate that used to go on history. And that was because back in the day, there was no real way to validate his story. So if a man gave a story, we couldn't determine if his story was true. So it was just written down as his story, history. That's where we get the term. And this was something that everybody knew back in the day. See, today we have this misconception that history is fact. And that's just not true, especially when you start looking into older books. You start realizing there's a lot of depictions of conflict and distrust. So they used a lot of methods to try to validate some of these things. And one of the methods that they used, actually, I'm going to show you right here, is ancient coins, okay? Coins, as connected with inscriptions on stone, are memorial of historical facts, more certain because more permanent and unalterable than the writings of the historian. But there are many historical documents in metal and marble which have survived the lapse of more than 2,000 years, supposedly, and are legible as when they were first published. Such documents, therefore, when known to be genuine, are irresistible evidence, which no further historian can controvert because they are not liable to the corruptions and uncertainties introduced by copyists into manuscripts. The study, therefore, of coins and gems is recommended to our notice by many interesting circumstances, as displaying the most unerring and best preserved monuments of ancient art, and so becoming the standard of history and the testimony of its truth and falsehood. What it's basically saying is that coins are a better kept form of history, since history cannot be reliable since it's changeable. Basically, all history has been manipulated. Now, speaking of coins, there's in fact a very interesting coin that was found. Here it is, ancient Christian metal. So this coin, by the way, which says the Messiah reigned, he came in peace, and being made the light of man, he lives. Now, what I want to point out to you is that this is just one book from the 1800s that alludes to the fact that we don't know our history, guys. This is just one book, okay? I got a whole stack of books. And when you start reading through these books, you start to realize the history that they told us is not quite the history that actually exists. And I love reading through the old books. You want to know why? Because it's like accessing the old internet. This was like the internet of the day. Now let's point out another fascinating component. This is relics in the Dark Ages. The period commencing the middle of the 8th and the extending to the middle of the 16th century may justly be called a period of darkness. A nominal Christianity had taken the place of paganism. Yet this period comprehends more instances of absurdity in opinion and elaborate folly in superstitious practices than the whole of the other portions of history of the church. Okay, so they were saying during the Dark Ages, there was so many fascinating his stories that it just seemed insane, okay? In this melancholy period, the priests and professors of the religion of Jesus, having indeed a form of godliness but denying the power therefore, suffered imposture and fanaticism to usurp the name of religion. What it's basically stating is that there was a bunch of people at that time that were claiming to be Christians or starting a new religion or revelation of Christ, and they were usurping, stealing the authority of Christ and the religious means to present their own authority over these people. Some of them thought they were amazing, and some of them wrote down histories that are so insanely fantastical, you're like, there's no way that this could even be real. The unturning benevolent of the early Christians, the faith, hope, and charity of the apostles became almost extinct. Guys, people forgot what it meant to be a Christian, apparently, in the Dark Ages. The historian, finding himself wandering amidst the arbitrations of the human understanding, has to grope with his way through the confused accounts of monastic institutions, relics, canonizations, and indulgences, and he finds it no easy matter to conduct his reader safe amidst the interdicts of the popes, the battles of the crusaders, and wrangling of the schools. You see, they had to wrangle the schools into building a consensus of a standardized history that was true, because there was so many different histories that just had different opinions. They are interesting chiefly as illustrations of the weakness of the human nature when suffered to grope in the maze of ignorance of superstitions. In such circumstance, there appears in men a propensity to folly, which in an enlightened age would never be suspected. And so it's very fascinating when you look into this stuff, because you kind of get a glimpse at what people's perspective actually was of the things going on at that time. Now, a lot of this stuff is very inconsistent with the things that we know or assume today. We think that this was a period set in stone, but when you read these old antiquity texts, you start to realize that maybe the narrative that they're telling us isn't quite as accurate as we thought it was. Now I'm going to explain to you that there is a better form of history, and it's something that we used to teach people, we used to teach children, but we removed it from schools. It's called etymology. Etymology is a much more stronger preservation element of our true history. Now, etymology and coins were actually the more systematic approach to determining historical accounts. Now I'm going to give you an etymological example of how etymology is going to preserve our future. Right now, if I was to tell you somebody that got Epsteined, you would probably assume it would mean sexually blackmailed, probably. And that would be a right assumption. Now, this word will transmute across cultures and time and barriers, and it will be different to pronounce in certain cultures and certain regions, so it will become Epstein, and then it'll become steened, they got steened. And in the future, there will be a word, and it will be, oh, he got steened. And you will know what the term steened means. It means to be sexually blackmailed or manipulated in a sexual context. That will be the word of the future, to be steened. Okay, and this is how etymology works. It's kind of like the word soldier, which comes from soldier or soldier, which is why the old English spelling of soldier included the U in the word soul. It literally means the one whose soul goes to die, a dyer, someone who is in the process of dying. Now, you can't really stop the etymological shifts in society. Like, what are you going to do? Tell people to stop using the word? Don't use Epstein, don't use Steen. That's an appropriate word because it paints a certain people group in a bad light. Like, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. But what you can do is you can write out his story from the origin, and you can change his story. Can't change etymology as easily because people are just going to be peopling. You know what I mean? But history can change the origin to say that it came from a steamboat. That's where the word Epstein came from. And see, this is what has happened to a lot of our words today. But etymology, like I said, tends to have a better root understanding when you look at the context and the related terms to that word in different languages across different barriers, because words change. They actually go from one language, switch to another language, and then switch back to the other language. So it's really fascinating. And even in this book itself, which is a magazine, even though it's an old book, which is fascinating because it's called a magazine, because the word magazine comes from maga, which is magic or mage. This is the word maga. Zine is actually a type of corn coating, which they also use in printing, but it's also from zine or zine or zin or sin. It's a derivation for sin. It has a reference to being the word beautiful, interesting enough, but magazine is beautiful magic or magical sin. That's literally what this comes from. And magazine in French means store or market, and market is where we get the mark of the beast, proposed on people that could buy and sell. Hence where we get the word market. It's a market where you buy and sell things, right? And what were old books actually called? They were called grammar books, which grammar comes from the etymological word grimoire. And a grimoire is a book of magic or spells. So a lot of our words today that we have are actually etymological plays to the words that used to exist back then. And it's very important to understand this because they removed etymology from our school books a long time ago. And there's a reason for that, because they don't want you to know your history. They wanted to be able to engineer a different history and make you believe a fabricated history that is just simply not true. So anyways, I hope you guys dig into etymology, and I hope you guys dig into some old books and start questioning the reality that you've been sold. We know right now with the Epstein list that obviously the good guys are not the ones winning all the time. The victors of the battlefield are the ones giving his story. So his story may not be the true story. So I hope this helps, and I hope it allows you to begin questioning the narrative that they are selling you.